I never thought standing up for my rights would lead to bulldozers in my front yard. But that's exactly what happened. One morning, I woke up to the sound of crashing wood and snapping beams my house. The home I'd worked so hard for was being torn down, and the worst part? It wasn't a city order. It wasn't even a legal issue. It was a personal attack, carried out by a neighbor who decided she ran the entire neighborhood. Just because I refused to join her HOA. This all started when I bought a house in what I believed was a peaceful non-HOA community. That was the draw. No strict rules, no monthly fees, just freedom. But shortly after moving in, I got a knock on the door. A woman named Diane introduced herself as the head of the local improvement committee, which, to me, sounded harmless. She handed me a welcome packet and a form to join her HOA voluntary, she said. I politely declined. That's when things started getting strange. First, I got notices about my grass being too tall. Then letters about the paint color on my mailbox. And each time, Diane's name was at the bottom. She said I had to comply with HOA rules of Anne, though I never signed up. When I reminded her of that, she didn't care. "You're in this neighborhood. That's enough," she told me. I stood my ground. I wasn't about to be bullied into joining something I never agreed to. But apparently, Diane didn't like hearing no. A few weeks later, while I was out of town for work, she took things into her own hands. Contractors showed up, claimed my house was in violation, and began demolition. What Diane didn't expect was what came next. I didn't just rebuild, I fought back. I exposed everything, gathered proof, and called in the authorities. And when the truth finally came out, let's just say the tables turned in a way she never saw coming. But before we get to that part, how did it all spiral this far? And what exactly gave her the power to do what she did? Let's rewind a little, It all started months before the demolition, when I first moved in. The house wasn't perfect, it needed some love, but it was mine. I'd saved for years, picked this place because it wasn't part of an HOA. And I liked the idea of living without someone policing how tall my grass was or what color I could paint my front door. But Diane, the so-called HOA president, had other plans. She lived 2 houses down, and from day one, she acted like she owned the whole street. At first, it was little things, friendly waves that turned into judgmental stares. Then came the letters. Not official city letters, but typed notices on HOA letterhead telling me I was in violation of neighborhood standards. One was about a work van parked in my driveway. Another about a lawn chair in the front yard. I kept asking, how could I violate rules for a group I never joined? Diane always gave the same smirk and said, "It's in the community agreement." But here's the thing, I never signed any agreement. I did my homework, pulled public records, talked to neighbors. Turns out, only a few homes in the area were actually part of Diane's HOA, and even those folks weren't happy about it. She had kind of forced it on them too, showing up at their doors with paperwork and pressure. Most signed just to make her go away. I refused. That clearly made me her target. The harassment got worse. Trash mysteriously knocked over, notes taped to my door, anonymous complaints filed with the city all traced back to Diane or her so-called committee. I started documenting everything. I had a folder full of letters, timestamps, even footage from a cheap security cam I installed out front. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know how far she was willing to go. Then came the notices taped to my mailbox saying my home was non-compliant and needed to be brought to code. I ignored them, thinking they were just more empty threats. But then I came home to find my gate broken open and orange flags staked around my yard. Something was coming. I just didn't realize how bad it would get. The day I saw those orange flags, I knew something wasn't right. They were the kind surveyors use, bright, bold, and scattered along the edge of my yard like someone was planning a major project. I called the city right away, thinking maybe it was road work or utility maintenance. But the city had no record of any permits or scheduled work near my property. That's when the pit in my stomach got heavier. A few days later, a group of men in safety vests showed up. No warning, no explanation. They walked around the perimeter, pointing, measuring, marking things down on clipboards. When I asked who they were with, one of them just said, "We're here on behalf of the HOA." I told them this property wasn't under any HOA. They just shrugged and kept working. I called the police to report trespassing, but by the time an officer showed up, the crew was gone. Diane was standing across the street, arms folded, watching like she owned the place. When I tried confronting her, she acted innocent. "They must have had the wrong address," she said, but the smirk on her face told another story. That night, I went online and started researching HOA abuse stories. Turns out, this kind of thing isn't unheard of. Rogue HOA leaders using intimidation, shady legal language, and fake fines to control people who never even agreed to be part of their association. The deeper I dug, the more I realized Diane was following a pattern: fake notices, phony compliance letters, threats of fines, and now what looked like illegal property work. I tried warning my neighbors. Some listened, some didn't. A few were scared to even talk about her. One guy down the block told me she once threatened to sue him over a lawn ornament. Another said she'd tried to get his car towed for parking too long on the street. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I went out of town for just 2 days, and when I came back, everything was different. My front fence was gone. My porch tripped apart. My house looked like it had been hit by a wrecking crew. And Diane? She was nowhere to be found. I stood there frozen, staring at the mess that used to be my home. The front door was gone. The windows were shattered. Part of the roof was caved in like someone had just given up halfway through demolishing it. I couldn't even process it at first. It looked like a tornado had hit, but there'd been no storm. Just Diane and her so-called HOA. I called the police immediately. When they arrived, they looked just as confused as I was. "Who did this?" the officer asked. I handed over the file. I'd been building copies of the letters, timestamps from my camera, records of her harassment. The officer flipped through them slowly, then said, "You're going to want to file a formal report." It was clear they weren't ready to treat it as a crime scene. Not yet. That night, I stayed with a friend. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. How could someone do something like this and think they'd get away with it? I went over every moment from the past few months. Every ignored warning sign. Every fake violation notice. This wasn't just about a house, it was about control. Diane had turned her HOA into a weapon, and I wasn't her only target. I reached out to a few neighbors again, this time with photos of the damage that changed everything. One couple who'd been silent before finally opened up. They told me Diane had pressured them into giving her access to their backyard for maintenance a year ago, then built them. $900 for landscaping they never agreed to. Another neighbor said she was threatened with a lien on her home for putting up string lights on her porch. The more people talked, the darker the story became. One strange thing kept coming up. Nobody could find official records showing Diane was legally running the HOA. No filings. No board members. No financial reports. Nothing. Just her and a folder of made-up rules. That's when it hit me. Maybe this wasn't even a real HOA. Maybe it was just Diane, and a fake title she used to control an entire neighborhood. If that was true, then how did she get the power to destroy my home? The more I uncovered, the more I realized Diane wasn't just some overbearing neighbor. She was operating something much bigger and much shadier. The HOA she claimed to run didn't exist in any public records. I checked with the county, the state, even pulled archived zoning and housing documents. There was nothing. No articles of incorporation. No bylaws, no signatures. It was a ghost organization built entirely off fear, fake paperwork, and Diane's intimidation tactics. But if the HOA was fake, how did she manage to hire a demolition crew? How did they not question her authority? That question haunted me. So I tracked down the company. At first, they refused to talk. But after some pressure and photos of the damage, they admitted they'd received a work order, signed by president of the Westbridge HOA. Diane had used a forged title, maybe even a fake permit, to authorize the job. No one had bothered to check. Meanwhile, my house sat in ruins. The city posted a notice saying the property was unsafe, which only made things worse. I couldn't live there. I couldn't fix it without permits and insurance. They were dragging their feet, saying it wasn't clear who was responsible. I felt trapped, homeless, frustrated, and completely powerless. But then something shifted. Word started to spread. More neighbors came forward. Someone found a flyer Diane had printed years ago, recruiting people for her HOA. Except it had no legal disclaimers or licensing info. Another neighbor, who used to work in real estate, helped me dig into property records. Turns out Diane didn't even have the legal right to form an HOA in our subdivision. The original development contract never included one. I started gathering everything: photos, emails, recorded conversations, testimony from neighbors. My folder turned into a bin.